So we're going to be having a discussion now with regards to the SAPIC conference that's coming up quite soon, and you're going to be one of the panelists there. And I want to get us kick-started by, can you just quickly give me like a 2-minute origin story? It can be a little bit longer, but basically an origin story of who you are, where do you come from, and kind of what makes you you.
Yeah, so my name is Farayi Kambarami. I was born and bred in Harare, Zimbabwe, in a little township called Mavuku, where I studied there. And then I went to the University of Zimbabwe for my undergrad, studied business and computer science. And then I went into Unilever, started working for them as a management trainee. And that's where I actually got introduced to supply chain management, because by some fluke, my first boss was both the group IT manager and the group planning manager, and planning from a supply chain point of view. So if you think about the SCORE model, plan, source, make, deliver, he was in charge of plan, source, and plan, make. The planning of buying and the planning of manufacturing, both the MRP and production planning. So I worked for him initially fixing his ERP system from an IT perspective, and then I fell in love with the planning elements of it. So after the end of my training, after Unilever had a rotation system, you did a couple of departments. At the end of it, I was hired as as assistant planning manager for a little while. So I worked for him now as assistant planning manager, looking after MRP planning, parameters, planning factories, scheduling the factory, and making sure that we had enough raw materials into the factory. Then got out of that, went back into IT, did IT project management, Y2K, made sure that our systems didn't fall over that period of time, and then did a significant ERP implementation for them, re-implementing the MRP application. So that got me back. At the end of that project, I was given the option of either spending more time implementing ERP applications across several Unilever branches, or going into planning. So I chose to go back into planning. So I went into planning management, again, running the factory, planning the factory in Harare, making sure that we had both the demand and supply planning and a few other sub factories in the sub region. Then went out of that. Long story short, key account management, back into planning, and moved across to South Africa in 2006, and joined Woolworths, which is my day job at the moment, and in Willis have done planning, done a bit of training, and now I'm responsible for what they call central planning and data, and working in supply chain, and also dabbling in somewhat data and analytics. So that's who I am, and this is what brings me here.
Amazing. I have a quick few questions I want to quickly dive into, because there's a few interesting things here. The first one, business and computer science.
Yes.
What made you decide to study both of them at the same time?
Well, the nice thing, it's actually, it's one other funny thing. Growing up, I really wanted to be an engineer.
Okay.
I wanted to be a specific type of engineer. I wanted to be a computer engineer, and my dream was to go to MIT. But this was like a pipe dream. I came from a neighborhood where we didn't have the money to afford it. My A levels were actually sponsored by a bursary, and varsity was free, if you like, because the government paid for us. So when I went to university, or applied for varsity, I was looking for something to do with computer, anything. But unfortunately, when I moved from, so I went to a township school for my O level. So in Zim, you've got a 2-tier education system in terms of high school. You first do your O levels, which is the first 4 years from equivalent grade 8 to grade 12, if you like, 11, sorry. You grade 12 or whatever.
During your high school career.
Your first 4 years are your O levels, and you then go to A levels, where you have to choose 3 subjects. So I did my O levels at a township school, and I then went to what would in South Africa be called a Model C school for my A levels. And when I wanted to do the choice of subjects that you typically are allowed or need to do for an engineering degree is maths, physics, and chemistry.
Yes.
They wouldn't let me do maths, physics, and chemistry, even though I sort of had all the subjects that I required. So I ended up doing a combination that only had maths and economics and geography. So that's what I did for my A levels. So when I was looking for for courses that had computer science in them, the one that sort of fitted this sort of subject combination was actually this Bachelor of Business Studies and Computer Science that they used at Ed. And it was quite a competitive program, you know.
Yes.
So fortunately, I went into it, and I'm glad I did.
It's brilliant.
I'm super glad because, I think everyone who did that course, it was really brilliant, and it served me well over the years in terms of just understanding enough about business and
business
enough
context.
about also computer science. So
no, I thought,
yeah,
it's amazing that you kind of in some way stumbled upon it. I mean, there's something there that maybe planted the seed in terms of doing the computers and knowing you wanted to be in the computer area.
Yes.
But I would listening to your story, I would be like, you're such a blessing that they didn't accept you for the physics and the biology. Because I mean, like business and computer science today is like one of the key skills you've used as I listened to through your career, and fundamentally what you actually I don't know if you would have used biology. Like it's
interesting. I met a lot of people saying, what you study doesn't really matter. Of course it doesn't, especially when you get into professional career, and most people don't get to use what they studied. But I've one of the fortunate few that
you had that fundamentals
the basics that I learned, I apply on a regular basis. I know enough about business and management. That's what we learned in business school, and I know enough about computing. And even though my day job doesn't require me to, I still code. The last time I coded was last night.
Oh, brilliant!
So I still dabble in both worlds. Actively.
100%. So it's interesting now. So I guess you also have, you said you have a love for the planning and the planning environment. You kind of gotten that over time from working within that environment, and that's kind of what got you in the logistics area. And then it sounds like you have a love then for development and programming. So you've got these different kinds of interests within this world.
So the way that I think about myself is as a problem solver, and that's and I think fundamentally what logistics people and supply chain people are, we are problem solvers on a daily basis, because you're essentially trying to solve the problem of what should I make? If you're production planning, what basket of goods should we be making? In what proportions to meet the demand? What is the demand that's out there? What do our customers want? When do they need it? Can we make it? What what's happening in the raw material procurement pipeline? How can we bring the best raw materials to actually make sure that we can serve our customers? And what computing does is it gives you a really robust set of tools to solve problems. One computational thinking just about breaking down problems and solving them. By breaking them into their constituent components. So that for me is a marriage made in heaven for me. So
brilliant,
it's absolutely something that I love doing.
And I understand, and I completely get now also why AI is you're so interested and you're so involved in it, and you love it so much, because it combines all of those worlds, and now you've got all this data that you can play with. Now you've got different ways of processing that data. You've got all these different tools that's evolving and becoming available that you can then pull in and apply. And you're like, hey, I don't know, tomorrow you're going to be, there's an interesting new problem, here's an interesting new tool. How can we make this work? How can we apply it?
Yes.
No, I love it. And then you were project manager as well, IT project manager. You led an ERP development implementation. I thought that was also quite brilliant. I know from back in the day, that was like the thing for a while. And people were selling it everywhere and so on. And then kind of found your way eventually again back into key account management.
Yes, I was selling soap as a key account manager. So
really?
Unilever sells, well, it's not just soap, but soap is one of the things you sell. But I had a team of, we call them business managers, which are basically salespeople and sales reps. And I managed a couple of key accounts in Zim at the time when our former retail was much more stable than it is now. It's still there. So I was responsible for just ensuring that our products were available at the time for
at the time
when
there?
when I was working for them.
Coming into the computational linguistics and kind of what you're doing with your PhD, and I guess regarding logistics in the AI world, I've asked the other people kind of what their mission is with the businesses and the things that they're doing and so on. But maybe let me ask the question for you in terms of what is your mission and what is it that you're striving to achieve with the studies that you're doing and where you're progressing with that, or maybe is it just you're just so interested, it's just such a passion, you just love doing it. So is there maybe a direction, something specifically you're interested in, a specific mission that you have, or is it more maybe just, you know what, I'm enjoying this so much, I'm exploring this space because I want to just be involved and actively
Yeah.
knowing what's going on there?
Yeah. So let me start by quoting Greg Brockman, who's the CTO at OpenAI,
Mm-hmm.
super smart guy. He says that every business is a language business.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding of that is basically that in every single business, people talk, they use language to communicate. And in fact, so even when you look at from a computer science point of view, when you're studying, one of the biggest challenges is requirements engineering, understanding, you know, what do people require, and therefore how do we solve that particular problem? Language is at the core of how we communicate as human beings. I mean, some would even argue that language is what differentiates us from all the other species, you know, our
Mm-hmm.
ability.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that plus our ability to cooperate flexibly, you know, that's,
Yes.
if you listen to other sort of people speak about this particular topic. So my passion really is, if that is true,
Mm-hmm.
at present, we privilege a small set of languages. And we know that if you speak in your mother language, if you actually communicate in your own language, understanding is much better.
Mm-hmm.
And so my passion is really solving language and technology for all the underserved languages, specifically starting with our own languages that are spoken here in Southern Africa that do not have as good language technologies as we've got for the others. And why do we want to do that? To actually enable people's creativity, to enable people to really work better. You know, like I said, if every business is a language, you know, business. You know, if language is in every single business, how do we enable every single person with language tools? You know,
Yes.
so that's my mission. That's I call it my
Yes.
second dream. My first dream was really, you know, doing what my father wanted me to do, which was he wanted me to get to varsity, and I did that.
Brilliant.
And so my second dream is really this passion to solve language for Southern African languages by giving them technological tools that enable them to use their own languages to conduct business, to interact with the world in any business environment without feeling disabled, which is what the experience of most people is at the moment.
Brilliant. So in some way, then that unlocks them and their abilities then to conduct business, get projects done, do things in life that might, like you said, might be feel like that they're hindered by it because then maybe feel like they're not able to clearly express or clearly understand what's happening.
Yeah,
So by
it's
giving
many simple things. I mean, one simple thing. Think about a farmer, a subsistence farmer out in a rural place somewhere in Africa. If they wanted to understand, you know, what's happening with their crops or with their soil, it's mediated in English at the moment, and they need to understand enough English to ask the question in English, and for it to be retrieved from the internet and comes back in English. So how could we make this interaction better for them? Like, how could we enable them to speak in their own language and get that response in their own language in a way that they could understand? How could we enable them to link to markets in their own language, still interact with other people who speak other languages, and the Chinese do it? Of course, when you speak to them on the side on Alibaba, we're speaking to them in English, but at the end, they've got a whole Chinese interface,
Yes.
you know, but they've
Yes.
mediated it nicely with technology.
Brilliant.
And we're not doing the same. So that for me is really
The end goal.
the end goal, you know, that I'm trying to gate for.
So within I guess in the supply chain world, with your background in supply chain and with what you're busy with studying and understanding in terms of AI and the mission that you're busy with, the question I want to ask is there any practical uses of AI that you have seen within the supply chain world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are quite a few. The unsexiest one, but yet the most valuable one, is sales forecasting. You know, it's something that even when I first went into supply chain, that was a problem that everyone tried to do. So we came from the world of just doing time series forecasting, you know, trying to figure out what our customers are going to need to buy next. And now what we're actually seeing is people using machine learning models that have got multiple causal factors being put into the models, and understanding what's the weather, what are events that are taking place, multiple variables being put into those models, and now getting better granular focused into the future, and then being better able to serve your customers. So that's really, I mean, it's not very sexy, but it's at the heart of business, because it's really
the core thing.
It's the core thing. You want to do that. And obviously there are other ones like routing. I mean, we most people don't think about it that way, but every single day that you use Google Maps, you use Waze, you know, it's an AI that's figuring out your route and giving you a prediction of what is the likelihood that you're going to get at a particular time to the place you're going to. It's giving you an estimated time of arrival. But, you know, if you just take that one step back and think about its usage by people like Uber Eats, people like Mr. Delivery, all those delivery services, you know, even the services that my day job, you know, we've got with Woolies Dash, you know, that's AI in the background.
You need to be able to, you need that, otherwise you won't be able to get to the people at the right places, the delivery times in the right ways. 100% that system needs to be running in the background, giving you those kinds of predictions. I mean, when you mentioned Google, when you mentioned Waze, my mind immediately went to that's also the perfect kind of real-time AI use case that people are exposed to every single day.
And they don't realize they are
exactly.
Yes, that
it's been
interacting
around.
with an AI. Yes. Yeah. I think people want the big sexy AI things like or like the ChatGPT at the moment with all its spurious information.
Actually, the next time I see a LinkedIn post saying this is the 99% of people are not using these AI tools, I'm gonna be like, oh my gosh, please, guys. Okay. How do you expect, or what do you maybe see changing in the near future with regards to AI and logistics? Is there anything specifically on the radar of some interesting developments?
So there are quite a few that are taking place in that space. So within logistics, if you think, if you broke it down to all the various places, there's some very interesting things that are happening in warehouses, and it's been a journey that's been happening for many years, the roboticization of warehouses. So whereas it's difficult to solve driverless cars on the road, on the main roads, within warehouses in a constrained environment, you can actually have AI robots that can really improve your efficiencies for picking, for packing away product into warehouses. So that's an area that you could use there. And obviously within our context in South Africa, the question is an ethical one, to say to what extent do you use that technology, given the fine balance that you need to play between employment as well as automation. So that's really going to be the thing that drives that. So that's one particular place you could see some key changes or shifts that are happening.
There's a lot of that happening overseas, or in
so
some
overseas,
specific for scalability.
So that, I mean, there's a lot of that, and obviously if you look at delivery as well, this all talk about drones and stuff like that. There's some practical usages. Some of it is pie in the sky, but the couple of use cases where it makes sense for you to do maybe last mile delivery using drones. That might be an interesting use case that I see actually coming to play. Obviously, sustainability is a big thing. I think I see businesses using all the huge amounts of data that they've got to try and optimize their supply chains from a sustainability point of view. So how do you use the least amount of energy? And in South Africa at the present moment, with the thing, the power utility whose name we shall not mention,
Yes.
and everyone utilizing solar, all these other technologies that we're using. How do you make sure that you optimize your usage of those things? That's a ripe use case, we generate lots of data with those devices, so you could actually optimize that. That's ripe.
That brings in a whole new ball game. 100%, like you said. For example, if you had a solar plant or something and you had the data, you will have the data of exactly how these things are being produced. Okay, how can we effectively make use of that? Maybe, I don't know, running specific machines throughout the day, running other things throughout the night. With some automation involved, you're upping your supply chain in terms of the amount of stuff that you can produce. It will be interesting.
Yeah, the opportunity space to utilize your data. Because for me, I think the simpler definition of AI is most of these AIs will make more machine learning models rather than AI.
Yeah, all the machine learning models.
Is using data and examples to tell our computers how to solve our problems, rather than explicitly programming them to say, this is how I want you to solve.
Yes.
So when we're generating all these lots of data, and in the supply chain, we generate lots of data. So there's opportunity to actually use this data that we generate to solve the problems that we've got. If we understand what we're optimizing for, and we've got very clear, and most of the people that are in supply chain are drawn to optimization.
Almost by definition.
Yes, by definition, that's
this is your goal.
This is the goal. We are continually optimizing, so we are getting lots of data, and we can throw it. At these optimization problems.
100%. And then within the supply chain and the AI world, what are some of the top challenges that you've seen crop up that kind of deters or kind of prohibits the industry from getting to the place of having all these interesting technologies working for them?
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges is just the sharing of data, its availability. So that's like a basic one across the supply chain where there are silos. So sometimes it's about each one looking for a local optimum rather than a global optimum, and I think that's an enduring question. And there've been initiatives over the years to, that say, how do we collaborate across the whole supply chain from farm to fork, as we call it, and utilize all those technologies to get us to get globally optimum solutions. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face. The other one is just the perennial skills shortage thing. So the people that have got the skills and capabilities to really address these challenges are still not as many as we would like to have. And I think what we need is to encourage more people to come into the space, to come and really address these particular challenges. And then I think the second one is really around pragmatism. I think those who want to solve those problems are also very keen on doing sexy stuff, quote unquote. And sometimes most supply chain things aren't really the big sexy things. It's really practical problems. Like, how do we make sure that we optimize refueling of trucks? It's not something that will look fancy on a CV. So how do you make that exciting for the people that you can actually get into the space? So I think it's a big challenge that you have in the space. And in our context in South Africa, and I think it's important to always have that particular context as well, there's always this fine balance that says, how do we do it in a way that we still retain jobs?
100%.
Or, that we skill up people at the same rate, that you do not have this displacement of people by technology. That's always, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yes.
And therefore at times you're always making this call to say,
100%.
there are instances where, the big thing, and it's one of the big discussions we'll have on this particular subject, is the tech doesn't necessarily replace people, but depending on how it is deployed, it may replace certain roles at certain points in time. So how do you
How do you
ensure
manage
that,
that
that transition actually
correctly? Yeah.
correctly? Yes.
And it's interesting because this could go in many different directions. And for me, in previous conversations as well, the key thing I always feel is important is there's so much talent and there's so much availability of people, availability of resources, and we, in theory, or in the past, we have been able to always punch above our weight on the global scale, and I still feel like we can into the future with the availability, with the things that we do, for example, with the technology that we're developing in South Africa on AI, on supply chain, in agriculture, and there has been instances of companies almost exporting not just the technology and the processes, but exporting that as a service to other countries,
Yes.
and
Yes.
then like, oh wow, we're actually competing and beating
Other.
businesses overseas. Why?
Yes.
Because we've got a lot more constraints that we had to deal with and figure out,
Yes.
hence the utility that we don't mention,
Yes.
and things like that. But then overcoming those challenges and making it work within our context gives us the ability to make it better overseas. And for me, the biggest wish there would be, as we go on this journey in terms of if there's jobs that's going to be replaced or displaced, then to, as you say, reskill them, make them part of that. These products that we're exporting raw materials, yes, but but at the point where we start exporting services and products, where we then basically go fetch all those UK pounds and dollars and bring them to South Africa,
Yes.
and then
I
build
don't know if you
this hub
watched the
here.
movie Hidden Figures.
No, I haven't.
So it's a movie that was made to tell the story of the women who worked for NASA during the space race, the Apollo missions, basically.
Yes.
And it's based on a true story. Obviously, with all movies, they editorialize and change some aspects of it. But one of the enduring things that I remember from that particular movie is during the building of the Apollo mission, initially there was a job called computer.
Mm-hmm.
And a computer was a person who did the job of calculating the trajectories of things. They were very mathematically literate.
Mm-hmm.
And most of those computers were women.
Mm-hmm.
And whilst those jobs were around,
Mm-hmm.
computer technology was being developed.
Mm-hmm.
And computers were being built.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the women, the protagonist in this particular movie, Sean, getting to understand that this technology is basically going to replace us. And the thing that she does in the movie, and I don't know if it's actually based on fact, is she starts this work of upskilling her colleagues and turning them into computer programmers. So the computer programmers became the computers who used to be the people who did the manual work, learned how to program, these mainframe machines, and actually they didn't get fully replaced by the computers. They actually
moved almost up a level.
And became better versions of themselves.
Yes.
And so that's the ideal. Obviously, it's not something that can be achieved in all instances. Sometimes people are either unwilling or unable to do that. It's even the statement that many people make these days around, you won't be replaced by any AI. You'll be replaced by someone who uses an AI.
But then for me again, the next step there would be, well, this is then up to the interface developers and the software developers and the people to make sure that when you're building out these systems, and a lot of this is also in previous conferences that we're talking about adoption and adoption is hard, and how to get adoption right. I fundamentally believe when you build the systems correctly with the people in mind you're building it for, you will be interacting with them. They'll be training up as you're building the system with them. So you're kind of working in lockstep. You'll get to the point where they will be using that system effectively to the best of their abilities while having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And that's now the responsibility of the developers who's building those interfaces, then to make sure that they do that right as well. Because then the people using the AI will beat the people not using AI, but then the people using the AI are the ones who almost were with part of the revolution in terms of it being developed, and those organizations then competing and actually winning.
Yeah, but I think for me, I think fundamentally, if you go back to what I said about myself and most people in supply chain, it's around whether the software solutions, whether they are AI-driven or rules-based or just basic transactional applications, are solving real problems. So if you're solving a problem that's a real pain point for users and doing it in a way that is almost intuitive to the user, I think people will
They will
gravitate towards it.
adopt it.
It's solving a problem that. But if you're doing something
Fancy,
esoteric,
whatever.
fancy, that is actually not grounded in any real world problem, then adoption is going to be tricky. And what I find in business and even in project that I get involved with is I always say, can we make the tool that we're building almost be like a Facebook or an Instagram or a TikTok?
Yeah.
You actually don't even need to train people to use it.
Yes.
You give it to them and then they just know what to do because it's intuitive. It's addressing a problem that they understand, and you know that you haven't hit the mark when you give something to people and they can't figure out what the hell is this doing. What problem is it solving? What am I supposed to get out of it? And
And you know what? Actually, on that whole trend, and I can kind of where this conversation's also been. It's when you can then have the tools. It helps you. It takes away the boring stuff, but it empowers you to do the fun stuff, and you can solve the fun problems. And you love solving the fun problems. Oh my gosh! I mean, then you're gonna have such a great environment in terms of how you operate and do things. Is there anything that you want to specifically mention? Any comments that you want to make? Anything that you'd want to raise as part of this conversation, specifically also for the panel discussion? So the panel discussion is around AI and logistics and so forth. Is there anything we maybe didn't touch that you're like, listen, this is something we need to speak about, and this is something that you guys are going to be talking about at the panel?
Yeah, so I am interested in safety and governance as well. I think what's key to note about AI is at least the methodology that we're currently using to build AIs, which is take huge amounts of data, put it into a model, use gradient descent to learn the parameters of a model, and use that to predict into the future. Basically, it takes us back to the very old days about garbage in, garbage out. But in this particular case, it's less it's not just about garbage in, garbage out. It's also around prejudices in, prejudices out. It's around biases in, biases out. It's basically, you need to be very clear, what are you learning from that data?
Yes.
And therefore, what can you rightfully predict coming out of the models that you're using? So the one thing that we really need to understand is that the AI is not going to be, it is obviously greater than the sum of its inputs. It does learn something that generalizes. So that's one thing that we talk about. So you're not just trying to get a model that predicts in the training set, but you want it to use a technical term, you want it to generalize, you want it to tell you something that is different from what you just learned. But it will be very much heavily influenced by the learning data. So governance, putting in place processes within your organization to understand what are the sources of the data, how well does it represent the world we want to predict? What are those things that we need to really think about? So that's an important one. And then safety is a very important one. And at present, we haven't really gotten that solved. The question of ensuring, how do you make sure that the tools that we build do not cause harm to people, either physically or emotionally, and there are many ways in which you can actually cause harm without intending to do that. And 100%. That's a very tricky question. So I think as technologists that are building these tools, that's really at the heart of, the questions that we need to solve for. And at present, there's a raging debate around, whether this is something that we should worry about in the future or worry about right now. And my view, my very strong view, is we should worry about it now. Anyone who's building any AI models should really think about how safe are they for the people that are going to use them for the world, and so that we do not end up, with unintended consequences.
Bringing something into production.
Close out with 100%. That old English saying that it's not about good intentions. The old English saying says the road to hell is full of good intentions. It doesn't matter how well intentioned you are. If you don't do your due diligence, you may be as well intentioned as you want to be and still generate bad outcomes. So good intentions don't cut it. You really need to think through how you build these models so that you get what you intend through deliberate action. So that's one thing that I'm really passionate about, that in this space. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Awesome.